My name is William. I'm 75 years old, a retired engineer and a widower. I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders through autumn leaves and summer rain, would call me a burden. But life has a strange way of showing you people's true colors when you least expect it. Usually at the moments when you're most vulnerable, most in need of the love you once gave so freely. It all started after my wife, Margaret, passed away 2 years ago. We've been married for 50 years. Half a century of shared mornings, quiet evenings, inside jokes that nobody else understood, and a love that had weathered every storm life threw at us. She was my best friend, my home, my heart, the person who made sense of the world when nothing else did. After she died, the house felt empty in a way I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just quiet. It was hollow, like the walls themselves were mourning. Too big for one man. Too full of memories for comfort, yet too precious to abandon. Every corner of our home carried her presence. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her favorite vanilla soap, the one she kept by the sink because she said it reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen. The living room held the indent in the couch where she used to curl up with her mystery novels every evening, a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the side table while she gasped and laughed at plot twists she never saw coming. I could still hear the sound of her laugh echoing through the halls. Light and musical, the same laugh that had greeted me at the door after work for 50 years. I didn't have the heart to leave. How could I? Leaving would feel like abandoning her all over again, like admitting she was truly gone instead of just in the next room, waiting for me to bring her tea. My son, Daniel, visited at first, in those early weeks after the funeral. He was attentive in the way grief makes people. Present because absence feels too terrible to contemplate. Helpful because doing something, anything, feels better than sitting with the weight of loss. He brought groceries every Thursday, the same day Margaret used to do the shopping. He helped with bills, patiently showing me how to navigate the online banking system Margaret had always handled. He checked on me once a week, sometimes twice, sitting in the kitchen while I made coffee too strong and talked too much about nothing at all, just to fill the silence. I was grateful, more grateful than I could express. It felt like I still had family, like I wasn't as alone as the empty house suggested. But as months crawled by, as grief settled from acute pain into a dull, constant ache, his visits grew shorter. The conversations became more perfunctory. His tone changed in ways that were subtle at first, a little more clipped, a little more impatient, a little less willing to simply sit in silence with me when words felt too heavy. He started to talk to me like I was a problem to solve instead of his father, like I was a task on a list that needed to be checked off efficiently so he could move on to more important things. One day, about 14 months after Margaret's death, he came over with his wife, Clara. She's young. 15 years younger than Daniel, though she'd never admit to the full gap, sharp-featured, with the kind of controlled appearance that speaks of hours at the gym and careful attention to detail. She's always impeccably dressed, always busy on her phone, always seeming like she has somewhere more important to be. I tried to like her when Daniel first brought her home 5 years ago. Margaret had been more skeptical. She doesn't laugh, Margaret had said after that first dinner. I don't trust people who don't laugh. I dismissed it then as protectiveness, but now I wonder if Margaret had seen something I'd missed. Clara looked around the living room like she was inspecting an old car at a dealership, mentally calculating depreciation and repair costs. Her eyes lingered on the worn carpet Margaret and I had chosen together 30 years ago, on the water stain on the ceiling from the leak we'd fixed, but never quite painted over, on the outdated wallpaper Margaret had loved because it reminded her of her childhood home. I saw judgment in every glance, saw her cataloging flaws and tallying dollar signs. "Dad," Daniel said, settling into Margaret's chair, without seeming to notice how it made my chest tight. "We've been talking. This house is too much for you. It's not safe for you to live alone. You should move into assisted living." I smiled, though it felt fragile on my face. "I can still take care of myself, son. The doctor says I'm healthy. My blood pressure is better than yours, actually." I tried to make it light, a joke, but neither of them laughed. Clara crossed her arms, her phone clutched in one hand like a security blanket. "It's not just about health, Mr. Pierce. It's about being practical. These old houses cost a fortune to maintain. The roof needs work. The plumbing is ancient. The electrical system is probably a fire hazard. Selling it would help everyone. Everyone. That word stuck in my mind like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. Everyone, meaning them. I had worked my whole life to pay off this home. Put in overtime hours at the engineering firm, taking on extra projects, saying no to vacations and new cars and 1,000 small luxuries, so we could own something that couldn't be taken away. I'd built something for my family, a foundation, a legacy. Now it sounded like an inconvenience, a problem to be liquidated and converted into something more useful, more liquid, more easily divided. I didn't argue. I've learned over the years that arguing in the moment rarely changes minds. It only entrenches positions. I just said, I'll think about it. But Clara pressed on, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone who thinks they're being helpful. There are some really nice facilities nearby. Clean, safe, with activities and meal plans. You'd have company. You wouldn't be so isolated. Isolated. Another word that landed wrong. I wasn't isolated. I had my garden, my books, my memories. I had neighbors who'd lived on this street for decades, who remember when Daniel was born, who brought me casseroles in the weeks after Margaret died. I had a life here, even if it looked small and quiet to people who measured worth in square footage and social calendars. I appreciate your concern, I said, keeping my voice even. I really do, but this is my home. Margaret is here. I'm not ready to leave her yet. Daniel sighed. That particular sigh that parents recognize. The one that says you're being difficult, you're not understanding, you're making this harder than it needs to be. It's the same sigh I probably gave him when he was a teenager arguing about curfews and car privileges. Dad, Mom's not here. She's gone. You have to accept that and move forward. Move forward. As if grief operated on a timeline. As if love could be packed away when it became inconvenient. I want to tell him that Margaret would always be here, in every room, every corner, every memory soaked into the walls. But I could see in his face that he wouldn't understand. Or maybe he would, and that was worse. Maybe he simply didn't care enough to let it matter. They left soon after, Clara already on her phone before they reached the door, Daniel promising to circle back on the conversation, a phrase he'd picked up from corporate meetings that made family sound like business. I stood at the window and watched their expensive sedan pull away, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet, but crack. A fault line forming in the foundation of what I thought we had. A few days later, Daniel called me. It was a Tuesday evening, around 7. I just finished a simple dinner. Chicken breast, green beans, the kind of meal that feels virtuous and tasteless in equal measure, the kind Margaret would have elevated with herbs and garlic and that magic she had in the kitchen. I was washing the single plate, the single fork, the single glass, when the phone rang. He sounded tired, frustrated. His words came fast, clipped like he'd been rehearsing them. Dad, I don't think you understand. I can't keep checking on you like this. I've got work. The kids have soccer and piano and God knows what else. Clara's on me about the mortgage. Everything is just a lot right now. You're making things harder. I stood at the sink. The phone pressed to my ear, warm dishwater dripping from my hands. I stayed quiet, waiting to see if he'd hear himself, if he'd catch the weight of what he was saying. I need you to be realistic, he continued, his voice rising slightly. I need you to think about what's practical, not just what you want. This isn't just about you anymore. And then came the words that hit me like a physical blow, like a train I heard coming but couldn't move fast enough to avoid. You're becoming a burden. There it was. The truth, naked and ugly, stripped of the polite euphemisms and careful concerns about my health and safety. The thing I'd feared since Margaret died, since I become suddenly alone in a world that values productivity and independence above all else. The thing I never thought I'd hear from my own child. From the boy I'd raised, the man I'd shaped with my own hands and heart and endless hours of patient love. I hung up politely, murmuring something about needing to finish the dishes, about talking later, about being tired. But my heart felt heavy, like it had filled with concrete, and now weighed more than my chest could hold. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table. The same table where we'd eaten thousands of family dinners, where I'd helped Daniel with his homework, where Margaret and I had paid bills and made plans and dreamed about the future. I stare at the photo I kept there, me, Daniel, and Margaret on his 10th birthday. We were at the park, and Daniel was holding a baseball glove I'd saved 3 months to buy him. In the photo, he was looking at me like I was his hero, like I hung the moon and stars, like I could fix anything and solve any problem. His smile was gap-toothed and genuine, unfiltered by the complications that come with adulthood. I remembered how he used to look at me that way all the time. I remembered how I'd worked overtime, skipped vacations, missed sleep just to give him a good life. How I'd gone without so he could have music lessons and baseball camp and the good sneakers that all the other kids wore. How I'd driven into practice at dawn before my shift started. Picked him up late after work. Sat in the stands at every game even when exhaustion made my bones ache. How I believed that love was something you proved through sacrifice, through showing up, through putting your child's needs before your own comfort. And now, a burden. The word echoed in my head all night, bouncing around in the darkness like a taunt. I wonder when it happened. The shift from hero to burden. Was it gradual, imperceptible, like the way hair goes gray one strand at a time until you look in the mirror one day and barely recognize yourself? Or was it sudden, a switch flipped the moment I became more responsibility than asset, more need than resource? The next week, I decided to visit him. I didn't call ahead. Some conversations need to happen face-to-face, need to be unplanned so people can't prepare their defenses and practice responses. Clara opened the door, her expression cycling through surprise to something like annoyance before settling on a tight, professional smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh, William, this is a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I know," I said quietly. "I hope that's all right." I was in the neighborhood. A lie, but a polite one. They lived 40 minutes away, in a subdivision where every house looked vaguely the same, all beige siding and strategic landscaping in 3-car garages. She stepped back reluctantly, gesturing me inside. "Of course, come in. Daniel's in his office." Let me get him. The house was new and bright, everything spotless, expensive, carefully curated. The kind of home that appeared in magazines, where every throw pillow looked purposefully placed and every surface gleamed without a hint of the chaos of actual living. Family photos lined the hallway, professional shots where everyone wore coordinated outfits and smiled on cue. I noticed there weren't many photos of me and Margaret, maybe 1 or 2, tucked in the back corner, overwhelmed by the newer, shinier moments they were building without us. Daniel came out from his office looking annoyed, his tie loosened, reading glasses still perched on his head. He'd been working, I could tell. He always had that specific tension around his eyes when work consumed him, the same look his father used to get when deadlines loomed. "Dad," you should have called. "I'm in the middle of something." "I didn't want to bother you," I said softly, though the irony wasn't lost on me. I was bothering him anyway, apparently, just by existing, just by needing anything from him at all. He sighed, and I heard the echo of that phone call in the sound. "You're not bothering me, never mind. Do you want coffee?" We sat in silence in his pristine kitchen, at a marble island that probably cost more than my first car. The coffee was from one of those expensive machines that grind the beans and froth the milk, and probably does your taxes, if you ask nicely. It tasted fine, but it didn't taste like home. I watched my son, really watched him, studying the man he'd become. Busy, impatient, always checking his phone, always chasing something just out of reach. I wonder if I'd failed him somehow, if all my hard work and sacrifice had taught him the wrong lessons. Had I shown him that money mattered more than people? That success was measured in square footage and marble countertops, instead of in the relationships you nurture and the love you give? After a few minutes of stilted conversation about the weather and traffic and nothing that mattered, I asked, "Daniel, do you remember when you were 12 and you wanted that blue bicycle?" He looked up, surprised by the apparent non sequitur. His eyes softened slightly, caught off guard by the memory. "Yeah, the 10-speed with the racing handlebars." "Why?" "You promised to work for it." I continued, watching his face. "You mowed lawns all summer. Mr. Henderson's lawn, the Johnsons, even Mrs. Chen's, even though she lived 6 blocks away and you had to push the mower the whole way. You came home exhausted, covered in grass clippings, smelling like gasoline and sweat. Remember how proud you were when you finally bought it with your own money? He smiled faintly, a real smile for the first time since I'd arrived. Yeah, that was a long time ago. Feels like a different life. It was, I said, my voice quiet. But that was the first time I saw how hard work shaped your character. How earning something made you value it in a way that gifts never could. You took better care of that bike than anything you'd ever owned. You washed it, adjusted the brakes, kept in the garage where it wouldn't rust. Because it was yours. Because you'd earned it. He frowned, the smile fading as he sensed where this was going. Dad, what's this about? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. The risk I was taking. It's about what happens when people stop earning what they want. When they start to expect things simply because they believe they're entitled to them. When they forget the value of sacrifice and hard work and patience. He didn't understand, not yet. I could see the confusion in his eyes, mixed with impatience, and that low-level annoyance that seemed to be his default setting with me now. Dad, I really need to get back to work. Can we talk about this later? Not later, I said firmly, with more steel in my voice than I'd used with him in years. Now, I have some paperwork I want you to look at. It's something important. Can you and Clara come by the house this weekend? Saturday afternoon? He hesitated, already mentally reviewing his calendar, weighing whether I was worth the time. I think we have something. Please, I said, and I let him hear the seriousness in my voice. This is important, Daniel. It's about your future, your inheritance. Your mother and I spent our lives building something, and I need to discuss it with you. That got his attention. I hated using the money as bait, but I needed him to come. I needed him to understand what he was losing, what he'd already lost. Okay, he said slowly. Saturday afternoon. 2:00. Perfect, I said. I stood up, leaving most of my expensive coffee untouched. Thank you, son. I'll see you then. That Saturday, he arrived with Clara exactly on time. Punctual, at least in this. I had everything ready on the dining room table. An envelope, some papers, and a check. I'd serve tea, like Margaret used to do when we had company, in the good china cup she'd inherited from her mother. Small rituals of civilization, of care, of pretending everything was normal even when the world was shifting beneath your feet. Dad, what is all this? Daniel asked, eyeing the papers with something between curiosity and wariness. I've been thinking, I said, settling into my chair across from them, about what happens when I'm gone, about the house, the savings, everything your mother and I built over 50 years, about legacy and inheritance and what we pass on to the next generation. Clara's eyes lit up just a little, a flash of interest that she tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. It's good that you're being responsible about your estate planning. So many people put it off, and then their families are left dealing with probate and complicated tax situations. I smiled kindly at her, though the smile felt like a mask. Yes, I just want things to go to someone who appreciates what it took to build, who understands the sacrifice and the choices and the countless small decisions that add up to a life's work. Daniel leaned forward, his business face on now, the one he probably used in meetings when discussing quarterly projections and growth strategies. Of course, Dad. You know I'll take care of everything. I'll make sure this estate is handled properly, that everything is distributed according to your wishes. I nodded slowly. That's what I wanted to see. That's exactly what I needed to hear you say. I reached for the envelope and slid it across the table to him. Go ahead. Open it. He opened it carefully, probably expecting a will or trust documents or list of assets to be divided. His eyes widened as he pulled out a single piece of paper, a cashier's check made out in his name. His mouth opened slightly as he processed a number, as his brain tried to make sense of all those zeros. Dad! What is this? He stammered, his professional composure cracking. Is this real? That, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling I felt inside, is $2.6 million. Every penny I saved, invested, and earned across a lifetime of work. Every raise I got and didn't spend. Every bonus I tucked away. Every sacrifice your mother and I made. Every vacation we didn't take. Every luxury we denied ourselves so we could build something that would last. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's face went pale, then flushed, cycling through emotions too quickly for me to track them all. Shock, confusion, joy, greed, guilt. All of it flashing across his features like a slideshow. "Dad, I don't understand," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because," I said, and I let every ounce of the pain from the past months color my voice, "this was meant to be your inheritance. The reward for a lifetime of being my son. The fruit of everything your mother and I planted and tended and grew. But I can't give it to someone who sees me as a burden." The words landed like stones in the quiet room. Clara's mouth dropped open. Daniel's face went from pale to white, all the blood draining away as understanding finally hit him. "Dad, I didn't mean it that way," he started, his words tumbling over each other in his rush to explain, to take it back, to undo the damage. I stopped him gently, raising one hand. "You did, and that's all right. We all say what we really feel when we're tired or angry or overwhelmed, when the mask slips and the truth comes out. But I want you to understand something, and I need you to really hear me." He sat frozen, speechless, the check still clutched in his hand like it might disappear if he let go. This money wasn't just a gift, wasn't just numbers in an account waiting to transfer on the day I die. It was something to earn, not with labor, not with mowing lawns or working overtime or any kind of job, but with love, with respect, with decency, with the kind of care and attention and patience that I gave to you every single day of your childhood. I leaned forward, holding his gaze, needing him to see me, really see me, maybe for the first time in months. "You think I don't notice how you rush through our phone calls? How you sigh when you see my number on your phone? How you look at your watch when you're here, counting the minutes until you can leave? I gave you everything, not to make you rich, but to make you kind. To make you someone who understood that people matter more than things, that relationships are the only wealth that really counts. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that. Or maybe I failed to teach it properly. Either way, here we are." Tears filled his eyes, spilling over, cutting tracks down his face. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I've been terrible. I know I have. After Mom died, everything felt so heavy and I didn't know how to handle it. And I know you are," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "I can see that you're sorry. But I don't want your apology, not yet. Apologies are easy. They're words that cost nothing but the breath to speak them. I want you to learn what your mother and I believed in, what we build our life on. That love is something you build, not something you inherit. That relationships require maintenance and effort and showing up, even when it's inconvenient, even when you're tired, even when there are 1,000 other things demanding your attention." I slid the check back into the envelope and put it in my shirt pocket, right over my heart. "You'll get this money when you earn it. Not with work, not with grand gestures, but with heart. When you remember how to be my son instead of my estate planner. When you can sit with me for an hour without checking your phone. When you can listen to the same story I've told 3 times before and still smile because you understand that I'm not telling it for me. I'm telling it because I need to know someone still cares about my memories, about my life, about the man I've been." Clara stood up abruptly, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger in equal measure. "We should go. We need to go." Daniel nodded weakly, standing like a man in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. "I'll call you, Dad." "No," I said quietly. "Don't call me because you think you should, because you're trying to earn something. Call me when you actually want to talk to your father. Or don't call at all. I'd rather have silence than obligation." They left quietly, none of the usual pleasantries about having a good week or driving safely. Just silence and the soft click of the door closing behind them. I sat alone in that dining room for a long time, the afternoon light slanting through the windows Margaret had loved because they faced west and caught the sunset. The tea had gone cold in the china cups. The papers still lay scattered on the table, and I felt the weight of what I'd done settle over me like a heavy blanket. It hurt, of course it did, Confrontation always hurts, especially with the people you love most, especially when you're forcing them to see truths they'd rather ignore. But for the first time in months, I felt something else too, a strange, unexpected peace. I had spoken my truth. I had set a boundary. I had refused to pretend that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I had valued myself enough to demand better, even from my own son. Days turned into weeks. Daniel didn't call. I didn't chase him, didn't send guilt-tripping texts or manipulative messages designed to make him feel worse. I had said what I needed to say, and now the ball was in his court. Either he would understand, or he wouldn't. Either he would choose to change, or he wouldn't. I couldn't control his response. I could only control my own actions, my own boundaries, my own sense of worth. I focused on my garden, spending hours in the soil, planting and weeding and watching things grow. Margaret had always said that gardens teach you patience, teach you that good things take time and care and consistent attention. I planted tomatoes and basil, green beans and cucumbers, more vegetables than one man could eat, but gardening had never really been about the harvest. I volunteered at the local library 3 times a week, helping with a senior reading program, shelving books, chatting with the librarians who treated me like a friend instead of a problem to solve. I made new friends, older folks who understood what it meant to be forgotten by your own children, who knew the particular loneliness of outliving your spouse and watching your kids get too busy to care. We met at the community center on Thursday mornings, an informal group of widows and widowers who'd somehow found each other. We shared stories, laughter, sometimes tears. We talked about our late spouses with the kind of detail that made them come alive again in the telling. We complained about our children with a mixture of love and disappointment that only parents can understand. We reminded each other that we still mattered, that our lives still had value, that being old didn't mean being invisible. One afternoon, about 3 months after that terrible Saturday, I was planting tulips in the front garden. Margaret's favorite flower, the ones that came back every spring like clockwork, like promises the earth kept even when people didn't. I was on my knees in the dirt, my hands deep in the soil, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't look up right away, focused on getting the bulb at exactly the right depth, the right orientation, the way Margaret had taught me years ago. When I finally glanced up, I saw Daniel standing at the edge of the garden. He looked different. Tired, yes, but softer somehow. Less polished. His shirt was untucked. His hair needed cutting, and there were circles under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights and hard thinking. He looked more like the son I remembered, less like the corporate stranger he'd become. He walked up slowly, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched in a way that reminded me of a little boy approaching his father after breaking a window. "Hi, Dad." I wiped my hands on my jeans, soil crumbling between my fingers. "Hello, son." "I came to apologize," he said, his voice cracking slightly. A real apology this time, not just words, but you were right about everything. I've been selfish and blind and so caught up in my own life that I forgot about yours. I looked at him quietly, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes silence says more than words, gives people space to fill with truth instead of rushing the paper over uncomfortable moments. He continued, the words spilling out now like he'd been holding them in for too long. After Mom died, I didn't know how to handle it, how to handle seeing you grieve, how to handle my own grief. So I threw myself into work, into keeping busy, into pretending that if I just moved fast enough, the pain wouldn't catch me. I kept thinking money would fix everything, that if I just made enough, achieved enough, accumulated enough, somehow the emptiness would go away. But it didn't. It just grew. And I lost myself in the process, and almost lost you. Tears filled my eyes. I didn't try to hide them. I'd cried enough in the past 2 years to know that tears weren't weakness. They were just proof that you'd loved deeply enough to feel deeply. He pulled something out of his pocket. The old photo from my kitchen table, the one with a blue bicycle and a gap-toothed smile, and a father who was still a hero. I found this in your drawer the last time I was here. I took it. I've been keeping it in my office. I look at it every morning to remind myself of what kind of man I want to be. The kind of man you were to me. Patient, present, proud. I smiled, though my vision was blurry with tears. That's a start. A good start. I've been volunteering, he continued, at the community center with the home repair program for seniors, helping older folks who can't afford to hire contractors, who need someone to fix a leaking faucet or replace a broken step, or just change the batteries in their smoke detectors. One of them, Mr. Patterson, he reminded me so much of you. Same quiet humor, same way of telling stories, same patience with my incompetence with a hammer. And it hit me, really hit me, how wrong I've been, how I was treating you like a burden when you're my foundation, the reason I know anything about being a man at all. I felt something break open in my chest, something that had been closed and hard and protected. That's good, son. That's very good. Your mother would be proud of you. He started to cry openly now, not trying to hide it or control it. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I called you a burden when you're the one who carried me my entire life. But I want to try to be better. I want to earn back the right to be your son. I stood up, my knees protesting after too long kneeling in the garden, and I pulled him into a hug. He held on tight, like a drowning man finding solid ground, his whole body shaking with the force of his tears. You never stopped being my son, I whispered. You just forgot how to act like one. But we can fix that, if you want to, if you're really willing to do the work. I am, he said. I promise I am. We stood there for a long time, holding each other in the garden while the afternoon sun warmed our backs, and the tulip bulbs waited patiently in the soil to become what they were always meant to be. That evening, we sat together on the back porch, watching the sun go down over the fence line, the same way Margaret and I used to, evening after evening, year after year, finding peace in the simple ritual of witnessing the days end together. Daniel told me about the kids, how Mia was struggling with math, but excelling at soccer, how Jake had just learned to ride a bike without training wheels, and how proud he'd been, how that pride had made Daniel think of me and that blue bicycle and everything that moment had meant. He told me about his job, about the pressure and the deadlines and the constant feeling that he was running on a treadmill that just kept speeding up. He told me about his plans to start a foundation for seniors who need help with housing, who are stuck in homes they can't maintain, but can't bear to leave. It's inspired by you, he said quietly. By watching you refuse to leave this house, even when everyone was telling you it was impractical. I realized you weren't being stubborn. You were being loyal to Mom's memory, to the life you built together, to the idea that home is more than just a structure. It's where your heart lives. I felt something warm spread through my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was. Pride. Not in the money I'd saved, not in the check burning a hole in my pocket, but pride in the man my son was becoming again, in his willingness to admit he'd been wrong, to change course, to choose connection over convenience. I'd like to help with that foundation, I said, if you want my help. I have some ideas about what seniors actually need, what would make a real difference. His eyes lit up. Really? That would be, Dad, that would mean everything. A few weeks later, the foundation was more than just talk. Daniel filed the paperwork, set up the nonprofit structure, recruited board members from the professional network and volunteers from the community center. We worked on it together, meeting twice a week at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework decades ago. We drew up mission statements and program guidelines, debated priorities and strategies, argued and compromised, and slowly built something that felt meaningful. The first check that funded it, the same one I'd once held back. Not all of it. I wasn't stupid. I still needed to live, still needed security in case of medical emergencies or long-term care. But a significant portion, enough to get the foundation off the ground and help dozens of seniors stay in their homes with dignity. That money became something bigger than just numbers on paper. It became hope for Mrs. Chun, whose roof had been leaking for 3 years. It became safety for Mr. Patterson, whose front steps had rotted through and made him a prisoner in his own home. It became connection for lonely widows and widowers who suddenly had volunteers showing up not just to fix things, but to talk, to listen, to remind them that they mattered. Daniel threw himself into the work with the same intensity he'd once reserved for his career. But this time it was different. This time his passion came from purpose instead of ambition. He brought the kids to volunteer events, teaching Mia and Jake how to paint walls and plant gardens, and talk to people who lived long enough to have stories worth hearing. He brought Clara too, and I watched her slowly transform from the phone-obsessed, impatient woman I'd first met into someone softer, more present. She started a program teaching seniors how to use technology to stay connected with their families, patient and kind in a way that surprised me. Now, when people ask me if I ever regret giving away that money, if I wish I just handed it over without the drama and the confrontation and the painful growth that followed, I tell them this. No, never. Because it bought something priceless. My son's heart back. It bought his presence, his attention, his willingness to sit with an old man and listen to stories he's heard before. It bought Sunday dinners where we actually talk instead of making small talk. It bought patience and kindness and the understanding that love requires showing up even when it's inconvenient. Life has a way of testing us, especially with the people we love most. It strips away the comfortable lies we tell ourselves and forces us to confront the truth about who we are and what we value. Sometimes you have to lose what you thought mattered to find what truly does. Sometimes you have to risk everything, even the relationship with your own child, to save that relationship from becoming something hollow and transactional. I'm old now and I don't need much. My garden gives me purpose. My memories keep me company. And the sound of my son's laughter when he visits, really visits, not just checks in, fills the empty spaces in ways that money never could. Once he called me a burden. Now every Sunday he calls me Dad with a warmth that makes the word feel sacred again. He shows up at my door with groceries. He actually helps me put away, lingering in the kitchen to talk instead of rushing off to the next obligation. He brings the kids by after school sometimes, and we sit in the garden while they tell me about their day, and I pretend not to notice when they sneak extra cookies from the jar Margaret always kept full. Last Sunday, Daniel and I were sitting on the back porch, watching Jake chase butterflies to the garden while Mia practiced cartwheels on the lawn. The evening sun turned everything golden, and the air smelled of the jasmine Margaret had planted 20 years ago, still blooming, still beautiful, still keeping promises. Dad, Daniel said quietly, I need to tell you something. I looked at him, suddenly worried. His tone was serious, heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. What is it, son? Clara and I have been talking about everything that happened, about how we treated you, about what we almost lost. He paused, watching his kids play. We want you to move in with us. I started to protest, but he held up a hand, not because the house is too much for you, not because we want to sell it, or because you're a burden, but because we want you with us. Because the kids should know their grandfather the way I knew mine. Because I don't want to miss any more time with you. Because I finally understand that having you in our lives isn't an obligation, it's a gift. My throat tightened. Daniel, I appreciate that. I really do. But this is my home. Margaret is here. I know, he said. And I'm not saying you have to leave forever. But Clara and I talked about it. And we want to add on to the house. An in-law suite with its own entrance. Its own kitchen if you want it. Enough space for you to bring whatever you need from here. You'd have your privacy, your independence, but you'd also have us, have family, have company when you want it, and solitude when you need it. I looked out at the garden, at my grandchildren playing, at the life continuing and growing and evolving the way gardens do. What about Clara? She never seemed particularly eager to have an old man underfoot. Daniel smiled slightly. Clara's changed too. We both have. Watching you stand up to us, set boundaries, demand better, it woke something up in both. Of us. She started volunteering with the foundation, and it changed her perspective on a lot of things. She actually suggested the in-law suite. She wants the kids to grow up with you around, wants them to learn from you the things I forgot, but am trying to remember. I didn't answer right away. I let myself sit with the offer, feel the weight of it, consider what it would mean. To leave this house where Margaret and I had built our life, where every room held 50 years of memories, but also to be part of my son's daily life, to watch my grandchildren grow up, to be present instead of isolated, connected instead of alone. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. I'll think about it. He nodded, satisfied with that. That's all I'm asking. Over the next few weeks, I did think about it. I walked through every room of my house, touching the walls, remembering the bedroom where Margaret and I had slept for 50 years, where I'd held her hand as cancer slowly took her away, the kitchen where we cooked together, argued about recipes, laughed over burned dinners and perfect pies, the living room where we'd watched Daniel grow from baby to boy to man, where we'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays and ordinary evenings that only became precious in retrospect. I talked to Margaret, too, standing in front of her photo, speaking aloud the way I'd gotten used to doing since she died. What do you think, my love? Should I stay or should I go? Should I hold on to this place where you lived? Or should I follow our son into whatever comes next? The photo didn't answer, of course, but I could imagine what she'd say. She'd tell me that she was in the house. She was in my heart, in my memories, in every lesson she taught me about love and patience and grace. She'd tell me that holding on to the past too tightly means you can't embrace the future. She'd tell me that Daniel needed me, that the grandchildren needed me, that family mattered more than square footage and familiar walls. You always were smarter than me, I whispered to her smile. I called Daniel that evening. I'll do it, I said. I'll move in, but I want to keep this house, at least for now. Maybe rent it to a young family, someone who'll fill it with the kind of life and love that Margaret and I had here. Whatever you want, Dad, he said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. Whatever makes you comfortable. The construction took 4 months. Daniel and Clara built me a beautiful space. Cathedral ceilings in the bedroom so it wouldn't feel cramped, large windows that faced east for morning light, a small kitchen, and a bathroom that was designed for aging in place with grab bars and a walk-in shower. They let me help choose the finishes, the paint colors, the fixtures. Clara insisted on getting the same model oven that I had in my old house because she knew I'd learned to cook on it and would find comfort in familiarity. Moving day was harder than I expected. Leaving the house where I'd spent most of my adult life, where Margaret had died, where so much of who I was had been formed and shaped and lived. Daniel came to help me pack, and he found me in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed where Margaret had taken her last breath, unable to move forward. It's okay to be sad, he said, sitting beside me. It's okay to grieve this too. I feel like I'm leaving her behind, I admitted, like I'm abandoning her all over again. He put his arm around my shoulders. You're not leaving her behind, Dad. You're taking her with you. In here. He touched my chest, right over my heart. That's where she lives now. And she'd want you to be happy, to be with family, to not be alone in this big house talking to photographs. I laughed through my tears. How did you know about that? Because I do the same thing sometimes. Talk to her picture. Ask her what she'd do. And I always hear her voice telling me to be better, to try harder, to love more generously. We sat there for a while. 2 men mourning the same woman, both trying to honor her memory by living the kind of lives she'd be proud of. Then we stood up together and started packing boxes, wrapping memories in newspaper, loading my life into a truck one piece at a time. Living with Daniel and his family took adjustment. I was used to silence and solitude, to eating dinner alone at 6 o'clock sharp, to watching whatever I wanted on television, without negotiating. Suddenly I was surrounded by noise. Kids arguing over toys, Clara on work calls, Daniel practicing his guitar badly, the dog barking at squirrels, the general chaos of family in full motion. But I loved it. God help me. I loved every chaotic, noisy, overwhelming minute of it. Mia started coming to my suite after school, doing her homework at my small kitchen table while I made her snacks and helped with math problems that were far more complicated than anything I remember from my own childhood. Jake liked to show me his Lego creations, elaborate structures he'd built with a kind of focused concentration I recognized from watching his father at the same age. Clara would knock on my door some evenings, bringing tea and asking my advice about work problems or parenting challenges, treating me like someone whose opinion mattered instead of someone to be managed. And Daniel came by every morning before work, just to say hello, to check if I needed anything, to share a cup of coffee and talk about nothing in particular. Those morning conversations became sacred to both of us. 15 minutes of connection before the day's demands pulled us in different directions. The foundation continued to grow. We'd helped over 100 seniors stay in their homes in the first year alone. Daniel quit a corporate job and started running the foundation full-time, taking a massive pay cut, but gaining something more valuable: purpose and peace. Clara used her business skills to handle the administrative side, writing grants and managing volunteers, and building partnerships with local contractors who donated their time and materials. I worked too, coordinating volunteers, visiting the seniors we served, listening to their stories and their struggles and their triumphs. I learned that there were hundreds of people like me, older, alone, trying to hold on to dignity and independence in a world that seemed to have decided they didn't matter anymore. And I learned that sometimes the smallest gestures, a fixed handrail, a working light switch, someone who shows up and listens, could transform someone's entire sense of worth. One day, about a year after I moved in, I was in the garden with Jake, teaching him how to plant tomatoes. He was 6 years old, all energy and questions and dirt-covered enthusiasm. "Grandpa," he asked, looking up at me with those serious eyes that reminded me so much of Daniel at that age, "why did you and Daddy not talk for a while?" I paused, my hands in the soil, considering how to answer. "We had a disagreement," I said carefully, "about what's important in life. And sometimes when people disagree, they need some space to figure things out. But you're not disagreeing anymore?" "No," I said, smiling. "We figured it out. We remembered that we love each other more than we love being right." He thought about this, his small face scrunched in concentration. "I'm glad. I like having you here, Grandpa. You're the best at stories and cookies, and not getting mad when I track mud inside." I laughed and ruffled his hair. "Well, that's high praise indeed." That evening, I found Daniel in the garage, working on one of his endless projects, building a bookshelf for Mia's room. This time, I leaned against the doorframe, watching him measure and cut and sand with the kind of focused attention that good work requires. "You turned out all right," I said. He looked up, surprised. "What?" "You heard me. You turned out all right. Better than all right. You stumbled. You lost your way for a while, but you found your way back. You became the kind of man I always hoped you'd be." He set down his tools and came over to me, pulling me into a hug. That's because I had a good teacher. Even when I forgot the lessons, they were still there, waiting for me to remember. "Your mother would be so proud of you," I said, "of the foundation, of the man you become, of the father you are to those kids. I see her in you, in the kindness and the patience and the way you love with your whole heart. I see her in you too, Dad, every day." We stood there in the garage, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of wood. Two men connected by blood and love and all the complicated history that comes with being family. And I realized that this ordinary moment of connection was worth more than any amount of money I could have left him. This was the real inheritance. Not the check in my pocket, but the relationship we'd fought to save and rebuild. Now, when people ask me about that check, about the $2.6 million and the dramatic confrontation and the months of silence that followed, I tell them the whole story. I don't pretend it was easy or simple or that we just hugged it out and everything was fine. I tell them about the pain and the risk and the very real possibility that I could have lost my son forever by drawing that line in the sand. But I also tell them that it was worth it. Every uncomfortable moment, every tear shed, every fear that I'd made a terrible mistake, all was worth it to get my son back. Not the distant, distracted version who saw me as an obligation, but the real Daniel. The one who laughs at my terrible jokes and brings his kids to visit and calls just to chat about nothing in particular. The one who remembers that love is a verb, not a noun, something you do instead of something you feel. The money? Some of it went to the foundation. Some of it is still tucked away, growing slowly, waiting for the day when the kids are old enough to understand what it represents. Not wealth, but values. Not numbers, but the lessons about earning and deserving and understanding that everything worth having requires something from us in return. I'm 77 years old now. My hair is completely white. My knees protest every time I kneel in the garden, and I move slower than I used to. But I'm not alone. I'm surrounded by family, imperfect, chaotic, beautiful family who make noise and mess and demands on my time and energy. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Every Sunday we have dinner together. The whole family gathered around Clara's enormous dining table, passing plates and arguing good-naturedly about everything and nothing. Sometimes we talk about Margaret, keeping her memory alive by sharing stories the grandchildren never tire hearing. Sometimes we talk about the foundation, about the people we've helped, about the difference we're making in small, unglamorous ways. Sometimes we just eat and laugh and exist together in that comfortable way that families do when they're not trying to be anything other than themselves. Last Sunday after dinner, Daniel pulled me aside. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said that day, about earning the inheritance instead of just expecting it. That was a long time ago, son. I know, but I want you to know I finally understand. The real inheritance you gave me wasn't the money. It was the chance to become someone worthy of it. You gave me the opportunity to choose who I wanted to be." I smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "And who did you choose to be?" "Your son," he said simply. "Not in title, but in truth. The kind of son who deserves a father like you." We hugged then, a long embrace that said everything words couldn't quite capture. And I thought about Margaret, about how she'd always believed that love was the most powerful force in the universe, that it could transform people and situations if you were brave enough to wield it honestly. She was right, as always. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, I sat in my room with a cup of tea and thought about the journey that brought me here. From the grief of losing Margaret to the pain of losing Daniel to the joy of finding both of them again, her in memory, him in reality. It had been messy and hard, nothing like the smooth, easy path I'd imagined when I was younger and stupider and thought I understood how life worked. But it had been real. And real, I'd learned, was so much better than easy. I pulled out the photo I still carried in my wallet, the one of Daniel with the blue bicycle, his gap-toothed smile and hero-worshipping eyes. I looked at it for a long moment, then added it to my small collection of family photos on the dresser. Past and present, side by side, showing a full arc of a life lived in love and struggle and ultimate reconciliation. "We did good, Margaret," I whispered the night. "Our boy turned out just fine. It took him a while, and it took me making the hardest choice I've ever made, but he got there. We got there." I imagine her response, that knowing smile she always wore when she was proven right about something. She'd tell me she never doubted it. She'd tell me that love always finds its way home if you're patient enough and brave enough and willing to risk everything to save what matters most. And she'd be right about that too. I'm old now and I don't need much. My garden gives me purpose. My memories keep me company. My family gives me joy. And the knowledge that I stood up for myself, that I demanded better and got it, that I love my son enough to risk losing him in order to save him, that gives me peace. Once, my son called me a burden. Now, every Sunday, every morning, every time he hugs me or asks my advice or simply sits with me in comfortable silence, he calls me Dad with a warmth that makes the word feel sacred again. And that's worth more than $2.6 million ever was. That's worth more than anything money could ever buy. Because in the end, the only inheritance that matters is the one written in hearts instead of bank accounts, the one measured in presence instead of presence, the one that says, "You matter, you are valued, you are loved." That's the inheritance I gave my son. And watching him pass it on to his own children, teaching them through his actions what it means to show up, to care, to honor the people who raised you, that's the legacy I'll leave behind when I'm gone. Not money, not property, not things that can be divided and distributed and turned into estate sales and tax documents. Just love, just family, just the simple, profound truth that we need each other, that we're better together than apart, that the greatest wealth we can accumulate is the wealth of relationships nurtured and maintained and fought for when it would be easier to walk away. I'm 77 years old. I'm a retired engineer, a widower, a father, a grandfather, a volunteer, a gardener, a storyteller. I'm a man who once had to choose between his pride and his son, and who chose to risk everything for the chance to have both. And sitting here in my peaceful room, surrounded by photos of people I love, I can honestly say I have no regrets. None. Because the hard road, the painful road, the road that required me to be brave and vulnerable and uncompromisingly honest, that was the road that led me home. Home to family. Home to purpose. Home to a life that feels full instead of empty, connected instead of isolated, meaningful instead of merely endured. My son once called me a burden. But through that pain, through that confrontation, through the awful grace of necessary truths, he found his way back to calling me what I'd always been, what I'd always desperately wanted to remain. Dad. And that word, spoken with love and respect and genuine affection, is worth more than all the money in the world. Please comment, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And if this is your first time watching my video, please subscribe to my channel so that you get notified whenever I post a story.